There are probably no two states in the world that hate each other as abysmally as Israel and Iran. Both governments regularly send threatening gestures in the direction of the other country, calling for the complete elimination of the adversary. But surprisingly, this has not always been the case. For most of history, and even until a few decades ago, both states can be called the Middle East's best friends. Iran was one of the first states to recognize Israel's existence in 1998, and the two worked very closely together not only economically, but also militarily and politically. Iran supplied Israel with cheap oil and Israel trained Iranian officers. In terms of foreign policy, they pursued the same goals and dominated the Middle East. But then suddenly everything changed. So what led to the end of close relations? How did best friends become absolute archenemies? And why could the enmity now trigger a conflagration throughout the Middle East? We take a look at all these exciting questions in today's video. Enjoy! The Middle East has always been a melting pot of civilizations and cultures. And so, relations between Jews and Persians go way back to ancient times. In the context of Iran-Israel relations, it is therefore crucial to understand the historical roots of both nations and their relations with each other. And both countries considered themselves close allies from the beginning. For both were close allies of the US and the West, and they strove for joint dominance over the Middle East. This was supported above all by the US, which saw the Tehran-Tel Aviv axis as an indispensable part of its geopolitical strategy in the Middle East. Israel and Iran secured the rich energy resources in the region and the borders between the Western and Soviet spheres of influence during the Cold War period. And both states also benefited incredibly from good relations with each other. For while Iran supplied Israel with oil, Israel supported Iran with cutting-edge technologies and in the implementation of major industrial projects. And both governments also worked on numerous joint military projects, such as the missile project Project Flower, which was kept under wraps for a long time and only later became public. And above all, in terms of foreign policy, the two states were always on the same page. When Israel was invaded by its neighboring states, including Syria, Egypt and Jordan, during the Six-Day War, Iran remained officially neutral, but secretly it now supported Israel even more generously with oil and directly lobbied the Arab states to cease hostilities. So we see that Israeli-Iranian relations, or their predecessor states, were very friendly for most of history. But this changed abruptly from one moment to the next. For in 1979, Iran was seething, and it was due to one man in particular, Ayatollah Khomeini. As early as the early 1960s, the Shia clergy described the Shah as a Jew in disguise and a recipient of Israel's orders. And hatred of Israel was to become one of the central points of his foreign policy. For it was precisely this man who supported the pro-Western regime of Shah Pahlavi in the 1979 Iranian Revolution, and he founded the Islamic Republic of Iran. He was now the sole ruler, and the revolution was not only a political upheaval but also a radical ideological change. The new regime in Iran was deeply religious and anti-West. Khomeini and his followers viewed the United States as the great Saturn and Israel as the lesser Saturn. They firmly rejected Western influence and, in particular, the State of Israel. And so Iran immediately severed all diplomatic and commercial ties with Israel, and the theocratic government revoked its recognition of the State of Israel. And Iran now aspired to take a leading role in the Islamic world and export the ideals of its revolution. This led to numerous tensions with surrounding states, including Israel, over the next decades. But the turn to open hostility then began in the early 1990s, shortly after the collapse of the Soviet Union and Iraq's defeat in the Gulf War. Thereafter, relative power in the Middle East shifted toward Iran and Israel, and they also clashed repeatedly in proxy wars. Iran became a major supporter of groups and movements fighting Israel, particularly Hezbollah in Lebanon and later Hamas and Islamic Jihad in the Gaza Strip. And Israel's intelligence service actively worked to sabotage Iran's nuclear program, causing Iranian scientists to disappear or die inexplicably time and again. So they had been waging a covert war against each other for decades, though they did not shy away from openly threatening each other with mutual annihilation time and again. Especially in Syria, which was ravaged by civil war from 2011, the two states clashed again and again. Iran supported the Assad regime, while Israel was concerned about growing Iranian influence in its neighboring country. This led to occasional direct confrontations between Israeli and Iranian forces in Syria. And in cyber warfare, both sides also regularly perpetrate attacks on critical infrastructure. But we must also understand the geopolitical component that lies above it. After all, Israel is a close ally of the West, especially the United States. Iran, on the other hand, sees itself as a close ally of Russia and China. And so the new Cold War between the great powers is also reflected in this region. In the process, Iran created the so-called Axis of Resistance, an alliance of various non-state actors and militias in the Middle East, including the Hezbollah in Lebanon and various Shiite groups in Iraq and Syria. But Israel was also looking for new partners and allies in the region. It found these primarily in the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, which normalized their relations with Israel in 2020. And in 2023, another powerful player in the region was on the verge of establishing relations with Israel. We are talking about Saudi Arabia. The Saudis also saw Iran as one of their main enemies. And these two states also keep fighting each other in proxy wars like in Yemen. And so it seemed on the verge of Israel and Saudi Arabia getting closer. Just like the motto, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." Many therefore speculate that the timing of the attack on Israel by Iran-backed Hamas was not chosen without reason. For an alliance between Israel and Saudi Arabia would, of course, be a thorn in Iran's side and fragment its claims to power in the region. But with Israel's harsh backlash against the Gaza Strip, negotiations with the Saudis initially seemed a long way off. And now Iran is also threatening to activate other allies, such as the Hezbollah in Lebanon and Shia militia in Syria and Iraq. And Tehran is now also talking more and more about its own intervention against Israel. Just a few days ago, Iran's leadership warned that it would feel compelled to launch a preemptive strike if Israel took further military action. And Israel also threatened Iran if it continued to interfere in the current military actions. So we see how quickly the situation in the Middle East could spiral out of control. For what were once close allies have become bitter archenemies to this day. And for a long time now, it has no longer been a mere dispute between the two states, but a part of the overarching geopolitical struggle between East and West, in which more and more super-regional actors have their fingers in the pie. I hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe and write us in the comments what you think about this conflict.